Hello there my RPG lovers and welcome to another video. Fixing Skyrim's combat is a series of videos I started back in early 2019. The name I chose for these videos triggers the hell out of some people because they think there is nothing you should fix when it comes to gameplay or specifically the combat. But hey, those people keep coming back to these videos, so it works for me. You little bitches. No, but seriously, there is nothing wrong with vanilla gameplay. I'm actually still playing and enjoying vanilla Skyrim on my Nintendo Switch. But if you have a half-decent PC, why not take the advantage of some high-quality mods, like the one we're going to talk about today. It's called True Directional Movement Modernized Third-Person Gameplay. This mod came out just a few days ago, so I didn't have a ton of time to test it, like I usually do before I start making these kinds of videos. The thing is, almost none of these features are brand new, which means that we already had some other mods that try to do the same thing. However, this mod just does them a lot better and it feels really polished. It's highly customizable as well, so you can tailor it to your needs as you see fit. Anyway, let's start talking about everything which this mod has to offer. This mod does a lot more than the name would suggest, but since it's called True Directional Movement, let's start with that. It enables a 360-degree movement in basically all gameplay situations, whether it's the combat or exploration. Now, if you're modding Skyrim on a regular basis, you probably stumbled upon a mod which does a similar thing. Realistic Animation Project is a mod which I'm referring to, and I used it myself for a very long time, as you could see in my previous videos. However, this mod has never been ported to Skyrim Special Edition and it hasn't been updated since forever. By the way, True Directional Movement is only for Skyrim Special Edition, but if someone wants to port it to Legendary Edition, the mod author has given the permission to do so. Anyway, TDM has been designed with the combat in mind, unlike realistic animation projects. To quote the mod author, unlike other attempts to achieve 360 movements, this is not faked through clever animation / behavior modifications. The rotation of the player character is actually changed, and thus melee, sprinting and everything else works correctly. I can confirm that every movement of your character feels really responsive, although it could be a bit harder to get used to because it feels quite different compared to vanilla movements. But sprinting in opposite direction of the camera immediately feels really good. This couldn't be achieved without another feature which this mod offers, and that would be the lock-on mechanic. Same as 360 movement, the lock-on mechanic has already been introduced in a couple of different Skyrim mods. I have a lot of experience with every lock-on mod on Nexus, and you could see them in my older videos. But to be honest, none of them can even come close to the quality of lock-on which this mod offers. First of all, it's extremely responsive and you will never fail to lock on to your targets. It's very precise because it will always lock on in the direction of your crosshair. Changing the lock-on target by default is done by moving your mouse and scrolling with your mouse, or by moving your right thumbstick on the gamepad. While moving your mouse to change the lock-on target is responsive, I suggest turning it off and using the scroll mouse button to change your targets. Or you can also bind it to a custom button if you wish to. The reason why I don't recommend switching your lock-on targets with your mouse is because it can feel really clunky, simply because you're attacking with your mouse buttons as well, so it's not that precise in situations with a lot of enemies. The lock-on button has a nice 3D effects and a couple of more presets that you can choose. As the mod author would describe, the camera lock does not simply attempt to keep the target in the dead center of the screen, it's a bit more sophisticated to avoid awkward camera angles and nauseating movements when you're too close to the target, although I'm still not 100% happy with the angles. I personally think the angles are fine, but if you are sensitive to motion sickness, there will be some situations which could trigger that effect, especially when there are multiple opponents on the screen. But you'll be able to reduce that when you learn how to properly use the features of these mods. It takes a bit of time to get used to. The biggest difference compared to other lock-on mods is the ability to sprint in any direction while you locked on to your targets. This of course wouldn't be possible without the 360 movement feature, and that's why I said they work so good together. The older lock-on mods were not really useful because of the extremely limited movement. But now you can reposition your character in any situation if needed, which is especially useful versus multiple opponents. This type of mechanic is of course nothing new when it comes to modern third-person action RPGs, but it's definitely new to Skyrim. That's why I said it could be a bit harder to get used to at first. With TDM, you will absolutely need to use the lock-on in fights, and I know some people probably won't like that. However, you shouldn't keep your lock-on religiously on your targets in all situations, but you will learn this when you get a bit more comfortable with the movement. Even if you're not using any other combat or gameplay overhauls, this mod alone will change your combat experience. But you know that I always recommend installing at least a couple of more combat mods, and I'm going to mention them when I'm done talking about the features of TDM. As you probably noticed, the lock-on mechanic adds a widget which displays the health of your enemy. Not only the health, you can also see the damage numbers and recent damage dealt. I think that's a really nice touch, but if your main goal is immersion, I think you're not going to like it. Fortunately, this mod is highly customizable, like I said before, so you can turn it off if you want to. Another small feature of the lock-on mechanic is the head tracking. In vanilla Skyrim, your character's head would randomly track targets in range. In TDM mod, the player character looks at their current target or the dialogue speaker.
Every Nord should admire Ulfric. He fights for all of us.
The last thing which is related to lock-on mechanic in TDM is the projectile aim supports. Instead of just being a cheap way to aim your spells and projectiles, the predictive aim can actually miss. The default version of this mechanic takes into account the current target velocity and it will aim the projectile at a predicted enemy location. So if the target suddenly moves, you will probably miss. You don't have to use this feature of the mod, but it's there and it can be fun sniping dragons in the air with the lock-on. The last feature of TDM that I haven't mentioned yet is the boss health bar that you could see in that dragon clip. Certain enemies you encounter will automatically be detected as bosses and you will get this huge health bar. I hate to sound like a broken record, but you can customize, enable or disable this feature as pretty much everything else in these mods. The boss bar is pretty cool and definitely useful. Now let's talk about the camera mod, which is highly recommended by the author of TDM. He recommends using the smooth camera mod, which adds a bunch of different camera features. To achieve the effect which the mod author of TDM intended, you would need to grab a preset called SmoothCam Modern Camera Preset TDM. Just make sure to follow the install steps on Nexus page and you'll be alright. Another great thing about TDM is the compatibility. It's compatible out of the box with some pretty famous combat mods like Combat Gameplay Overhaul, Combat Behavior Compulsion and Attack Behavior Revamp. If you're following my channel, you already know that I covered these mods in my previous Skyrim videos, except Combat Behavior Compulsion. But I have plans for that mod as well, so don't worry. I mentioned before that you can only use TDM for improving your third-person gameplay experience, but let me just quickly tell you about other mods that I'm using in this video. I did some testing with Ultimate Combat, TK Dodge and Animated Armory with new weapon animations. I tested Combat Gameplay Overhaul as well and it seems to be working fine. And speaking of previous videos, I'm still using ZX Slice hit stop and flinching. I did a separate video about those mods not so long ago, so you can check that out if you're interested. Anyway guys, I think that TDM is one of the best gameplay overhaul mods that came out recently. It seems highly polished, it's customizable, and it goes well with almost every major combat gameplay overhauls. I'll continue testing it, so you can expect to see it in future videos as well. Tell me your opinion about this mod and do you plan to try it out for yourself? Leave a comment down below. Don't forget to subscribe for more RPG content. If you want to support the channel in the long run, consider becoming a Patreon or a YouTube member. You can get your name on the end credits as well as some other perks like early access to videos, Discord roles, my plans for future content, etc. etc. That will be all and I'll see you in the next one.